by misconflating Islamism and Islamic extremism, they, in many cases, are making the problem worse rather than better. One of the first steps the interim authorities in Kyrgyzstan took were to release the 2 people arrested at Nokat about a year ago on clearly trumped-up charges of sedition, because they were angered when local authorities would not allow them to celebrate an Islamic holiday in public as they always had in the past. Then just last week there was a large arrest in Bishkek of people from Hizb ut-Tahrir. So I think we would have to say that, as Eric mentioned, it's very unclear what the new government's policy on it will be, and I think there's a role here for the United States in trying to indicate the direction we think they should be moving in.
Thank you, Jeff. Before we conclude, I would like to ask you, is there anything that we have not asked you about yet that you think would be a glaring omission in this hearing? Is there anything that you would like to elaborate on that you had touched upon earlier? Is there any other aspect that we haven't discussed that should be part of the record and of these discussions?
I just make one obvious and very brief observation, and that is we've been engaged in democratization assistance in Kyrgyzstan for the better part of 2 decades, and Kyrgyzstan is no more democratic and arguably less stable than it was in 1991. And this, I think, builds on Jeff's last question, and that is some serious introspection would be helpful as far as how the United States and the international community more broadly would like to engage Kyrgyzstan. I'm not saying that Kyrgyzstan's lack of democracy and stability is a result of U.S. engagement, but it is clear that U.S. engagement thus far has not led to that many improvements, with the exception, I think, of the very important programs that the representatives here today represent. But these are the exceptions rather than the rule.
And I would like to say that I think that to have a stable democracy requires a lot of patience and a lot of time. As I said earlier, it's a generational thing, and it takes time. It really does take time and patience, and that's one thing that I would really like the United States funders and the United States Congress to understand, that short-term programs don't necessarily work to grow this culture of rule of law. You need a long-term strategy with long-term funding. Giving a lot of money and then stopping money and then giving a lot of money again is not working. You need a stable flow of aid and a stable strategy on working on this rule of law culture.
Rachel?
I'd like to add to that by saying that you need a stable community of people who are willing to take the rule of law imperative forward, and you need a stable network of people who are not only well-resourced, but who also are protected, who are protected from abuse and protected from persecution. And in that regard, I just want to remember right now my colleague Azimjon Askarov, who is a human rights defender from Bazarkurgan in southern Kyrgyzstan, who's worked on issues of rule of law and torture and ill treatment in custody, trying to get better monitoring of police stations in the south, and who also had been documenting the mob violence that happened in Bazarkurgan. And he was arrested on June 15th. He's accused of incitement, and we have some very serious concerns about the nature of the charges against him and about the way he has been treated in custody, and his access to counsel and the like. And so I hope that I know that that his detention is something that the Obama administration has raised already with the interim government. I think it's something that it needs to continue to raise. And I'm sorry to say this, but I think that it's not just a matter now of Azimjon Askarov. I fear that the authorities in the South have already started to kind of reach out, not in a good way, to the human rights the human rights community, but I think it started to reach out to try to control activists and journalists, people who ask questions about why the violence happened the way it did, what the role of the authorities, what the role of individual law enforcement members were during the violence, even if it was to turn a blind eye to it or to be utterly incapable of stopping it. People who are asking questions about that, and also um, perhaps even to intimidate people from asking questions going forward. And I hope that I hope we do not see a further kind of crackdown in southern Kyrgyzstan, and that's something that the Obama administration, I think, needs to press very seriously with the interim government.
Jeff?
Just briefly, I think in terms of programs, it's very important for the United States government to help the Kyrgyz government develop capacity, because in 2005, a large number of people working in the government left or were forced out. The same thing has happened in 2010. And so where is the base of expertise that any new government is going to be able to act on? That's one of the reasons why the Soros Foundation has, in cooperation with the U.S. government, been supporting the American University of Central Asia since its founding in an effort to create a new generation of young Kyrgyz who can play this role. So I think it's going to be very important for the United States also to work through its role in the international financial institutions, because the new government is going to have significant balance of budget issues here. We noted that increases in electricity costs help to fuel these demonstrations. What we didn't hear is that, in fact, utility prices are not economically viable as they are. So someone is going to have to make up that gap between what people are politically willing to afford and what is affordable in the long run. So the United States is going to have to use its ability in the IFES to ensure that there's significant budgetary support to the new government to keep it going and keep it stable over the next year in order to try and create some basic stability in Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Jeff. That has to be, unfortunately, the last word for this hearing. Before we conclude, I would certainly like to thank all of our witnesses and our audience for coming today. Thank you very much for making your time available and certainly sharing your expertise and your excellent testimony, which we will make available as soon as possible. And I would like to thank you on behalf of the Tom Lantis Human Rights Commission, my colleague Elizabeth Hoffman, and myself for being here this morning. You know that we will continue to work with you. This hearing was just a starting point, and we will continue, the Commission will continue to monitor the situation in Kyrgyzstan, because that is exactly ultimately what we are all about, why the Commission was created in the first place, to see how we can help, how we can intervene, particularly in the cases that you had indicated, Rachel, where we see arrests, where we see detentions, and a crackdown on civil society, like the civil society groups that you refer to. With that, I would like to thank everybody, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very glad to hear you say that about Islam being